A second common approach to the future imports cultural assumptions about the future of a human being after he or she dies. If we're blessed, we go to heaven, and by we, I mean our souls, the immortal parts of us, and we get our harp, which we try to play without fingers. Maybe with our mind we can, if we have a mind. It sounds kind of silly, but what I'm describing is really in the heads of a lot of people, a lot of Christians. So I'm going to say that this is actually a dominant vision in folk Christianity, Western folk religion. Not the kind of stuff you get in a doctrine class, but the kind of stuff you get just out in the wider culture. I'm going to call that spiritualism, although there are a number of meanings to this term. So this is my own term, and I'm using it loosely. But spiritualism has to deal with treating our spirit as opposed to our bodies as what's real and lasting. So eschatology becomes really the story of the permanent soul as opposed to the impermanent body. In which case, the world isn't really made new. I just go through judgment at my death and proceed to a life after death in one place or another. That really doesn't match up with the apostles' proclamation of resurrection unto eternal bodily physical life. Another place where you might see this, sort of, is actually Dante's Divine Comedy. Now, Dante's Divine Comedy is a brilliant work, and I recommend it wholeheartedly. In the Divine Comedy, there's no denial of the resurrection of the dead to come, but it's so muted. The story is so concerned with the present state of the dead in hell or purgatory or heaven that it just pushes that hope off to an almost ethereal future. And that, I think, has the effect of training our imaginations to think merely in terms of where we go when we die. When that happens, the book of Revelation, for instance, the narrative doesn't make a lot of sense, and it doesn't really get a lot of traction, and people don't really know it. I remember I was shocked in high school to hear that Jesus was coming back. In which case, what do you do with Revelation? Well, you take its worship passages. It has some of the most powerful worship passages in all the New Testament. It's called the hymnal of the church, and it is. But in this vision, that whole it's sort of cherry-picked for its worshipful texts, and the overall outline is left behind, and we just treat it as a devotional text. And we tend not to read it because it's too scary and too odd. Here the danger is Gnosticism, right? The danger of this approach to the future is that we will disregard our bodies as having lasting significance. We'll lose sight of Jesus' resurrection as paradigmatic for us. We'll lose sight of the relevance of his humanity or our humanity or creation itself. So that's a second common approach. A third approach to the future takes biblical texts and reads them allegorically or merely symbolically, not as referring to actual events in a straightforward way. And gosh, Revelation's not a very straightforward book, but instead referring to them only symbolically. This is how most churches have done it over the centuries. The clearest expression of this and the most influential expression of this is called Amillennialism. Now you put the letter A before a word in Greek and it means non, like apathy, right? Apatheia is non-feeling. So amillennialism holds that there is not a literal 1,000-year millennium. That passage in Revelation 20 is to be understood symbolically or allegorically, not as an actual time in a sequence of events. Augustine makes this case and wins the day, persuades the church to take events like the millennium and the tribulation allegorically rather than literally. With the result that, well, what does the millennium describe? The millennium describes a time when the devil is restrained and when the gospel is unencumbered and Christ and his agents reign, when they exercise power. And Augustine says that sounds like now, doesn't it? So we are living in the millennium, according to Augustine. The devil's still there, but he's restrained. Christ has triumphed, and his saints triumph with him. What about the tribulation? What about this event where there is a great testing of the saints? Well, Augustine says that sounds like now too. You know, Paul is harassed, he never surrenders. He's never beaten. He's never finally conquered. Jesus' words to the 7 churches are, to the ones who conquer, I will give, to sit on my throne with me. And conquering is merely holding out. It's enduring. Under tribulation. So Augustine understands the millennium to happen at the same time as the tribulation. We are living in both ages. We are living in both conditions. That becomes the standard eschatology of the Catholic Church, and it remains the standard eschatology for the Reformers, for Martin Luther, for John Calvin, for John Wesley, for others. They understand these texts allegorically or symbolically. I was shocked to find this out. When I was a new evangelical, I thought everybody was a premillennial. I thought everybody believed the whole Left Behind timeline. And I was reading the entry on eschatology, or millennium, I think, in the Oxford Dictionary of the Christian Church, and it said, while millennialism hasn't been rejected outright as a heresy, it's always been viewed with great suspicion. And I'm like, what? That's like my church. But historically speaking, that's right. That was an accurate representation. The danger here is that hope can just end up as an abstraction. And this can ironically push the promised future way into the distant future. We're living in the millennium. We're living in the tribulation. The end could come now, or it could come in 10,000 years. Who knows? Well, apocalyptic literature has the end upon us. But amillennialism can really lift the pressure of the sense of an imminent end.